Billionaire Harrison Ford wanted to get revenge on his ex-girlfriend by inviting her to his wedding. However, the woman didn't come alone. She brought 3 children with her. When Ford discovered the true identity of the children, he immediately called off the wedding. "You haven't changed your number." The words came out of Harrison's mouth before he had a chance to weigh them. The moment they left, he wanted to snatch them back, not because they were untrue, but because they were too personal, too revealing, for a man who spent years burying his heart beneath million-dollar deals and titanium firewalls. On the other end of the line, silence lingered. A long, practiced kind of silence. Then came her voice. "Well, I wasn't expecting you." Gemma's voice hadn't changed either. Steady, calm, clipped at the edges like someone who'd learned long ago that showing emotion could be a kind of weakness. But even now, 6 years later, he heard the hint of tension underneath, like a thread pulled taut. "It's been a long time," he said, fingers drumming against the corner of his glass desk. 6 years? She replied. "Give or take a few months." He chuckled, but it was hollow and she didn't join in. The office behind him buzzed with the faint hum of air conditioning and muted city noise from the panoramic windows, but it all faded to white noise. Harrison leaned back in his chair and stared out at the skyline, where glass and steel clawed at the sky. "I didn't call to make small talk," he admitted. "I'm getting married." Another pause. He imagined her standing at the nurse's station, maybe wearing that pale blue coat she always had, a pen behind her ear, her hair probably shorter now, still no ring on her hand. He'd checked once a couple years ago, late at night, a bottle of scotch half empty beside him. Just curiosity, he told himself. "To Claire?" she asked, finally. He frowned. "No, her name's Naomi Caldwell. She's in public relations." "I see," she said, cool as ever. "I wanted you to hear it from me." He hesitated. "And I wanted to invite you." A bitter little laugh crackled through the receiver. "You're inviting me to your wedding?" "Yes," he said. "Naomi and I are inviting. And people who were part of our lives. You were, well, you mattered." "You're inviting me," she repeated slowly, as if trying the words out for taste. "Because I mattered. Yes." He left out the rest, that it had taken him 6 years to reach this place, this version of himself that wore Italian suits and signed mergers in 5 different time zones, that he'd imagined this exact moment, her walking in under crystal chandeliers, seeing what she gave up, that he wanted her to see it all and feel something, that he wanted her to suffer. But he didn't say any of that. He'd learned to hide intentions well. "When is it?" she asked. 2 weeks from Saturday, in Charleston. I can have the invitation delivered to your address." She didn't answer right away. He could hear papers rustling in the background, a child's voice echoing faintly. Then nothing. She must have stepped away. "I'll try to make it," she said. Calm. Too calm. "Good," he replied, pretending the pit in his stomach wasn't twisting. "I need to go," she added. "My shift's ending and I have to pick up my kids." "Right," he said. "Of course." There was something about the way she said kids that made him pause. But before he could latch onto it, she was gone. The line clicked. Dead. He sat there for a long while, staring at the darkened screen of his phone. A faint pulse behind his temple started to throb. He looked down at the invitation on his desk, cream-colored, embossed with gold script. It was as lavish as everything else in his life now. The marriage itself? Practical, strategic, even. Naomi knew what it meant to be with a man like him, what was expected, what was off limits. No mess, no past, no drama. And yet, he'd gone and invited the one woman who could still bring chaos into the carefully built architecture of his life. He told himself it was closure. But deep down, Harrison knew better. Gemma Ford sat in the break room of St. Anne's Pediatric Clinic, the phone still warm in her hand. The hum of vending machines filled the silence, and a faint crayon drawing from one of her patients fluttered on the nearby corkboard. Gemma leaned forward in her chair, elbows on her knees, hands gripping each other like a rope she didn't trust to hold. The room around her was quiet now. Nurses gone home, fluorescent lights dimmed, the sounds of sick children and weary parents finally giving way to stillness. But inside her, the noise was deafening. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened the photo gallery. There they were, 3 boys lined up on the living room couch, grinning, wrinkling their noses at the camera. Mateo with his serious eyes and that tiny furrow in his brow. Diego mid-laugh, hands still sticky with peanut butter from lunch. And Carlos, shy little Carlos, holding the family cat like it was made of glass. They were 5 now. And every year they looked a little more like him. She'd thought about this moment for 5 years. What would happen when Harrison found out? Would he be angry? Would he accuse her of keeping them a secret on purpose? Would he even believe they were his? He'd believe it. One look into Mateo's eyes and there'd be no denying the truth. The shape of their faces, their expressions, the way Carlos raised one eyebrow when he was confused. It was like Harrison had been stamped on their bones. But still, what then? She turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table, as if the photo could crawl out and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. The overhead lights buzzed softly. Outside the break room window, the parking lot lights blinked on one by one. Her shift was done, but she wasn't ready to leave just yet. 6 years ago, she'd written to him. 3 emails, 2 handwritten letters, and a phone call that never made it past Athena Martinez. Gemma remembered that call clearly. She'd been sitting on the edge of her bed, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the phone. The twins were still growing then. Well, triplets, as she'd find out 2 weeks later. The receptionist had transferred her call to Athena directly, and that woman's voice was colder than steel in winter. "Gemma," Athena had said without even a hello, "if this is about what I think it is, I'll ask you kindly to stop." "I just need to talk to Harrison," Gemma had said, her voice cracking. "He needs to know." No, what he needs is peace of mind. He's starting a company. There's a lot at stake. "He's going to be a father," Gemma had whispered. "That's your opinion," Athena replied. "And frankly, not helpful. This kind of thing could hurt everything he's working for. You should think about that." Then the line went dead. Gemma had sat there for hours afterward, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It never did. And somewhere between the 2nd week of crying alone in her car and the 3rd month of newborn colic, she'd made peace with one thing. She was on her own. But now, the rules had changed. She stood up slowly, grabbing her bag and pulling her coat around her shoulders. Her legs ached. The kind of ache you learn to live with once motherhood took over your bones. She stepped into the hallway, her shoes clicking softly on the linoleum floor. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. At home, the kitchen light was on when she arrived. Her mother, Leonor, was unloading groceries. Carlos was sitting at the kitchen table working on a puzzle, tongue sticking out in concentration. Diego was climbing on a stool, trying to get a cookie from the cabinet. Mateo was nowhere in sight, probably in his room building another tower of Legos that would collapse the moment someone breathed wrong. "They were good," Leonor said, giving Gemma a tired smile. "A little wild before dinner, but they settled down." Gemma dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and bent to kiss Carlos on the head. "Did you eat?" she asked him. "Chicken nuggets," he replied without looking up. "I saved one for you." "Such a gentleman," she said, smiling softly. She sat down next to him and watched him fit a blue corner piece into place. Her mother glanced at her from the kitchen, reading her mood like a book. "What happened?" Leonor asked, gently. Gemma hesitated. Then, "He called." Her mother didn't pretend not to know who. Leonor dried her hands on a towel. "And? He's getting married." There was a silence between them, not shock, just confirmation. The kind that still managed to sting even when you'd long expected it. "He invited me." That made Leonor pause. Gemma looked at her, voice low. He doesn't know. About the boys. Not a clue. Carlos looked up. Who doesn't know? She blinked, realizing too late how sharp a child's hearing could be. Someone I used to know, she said quickly, from a long time ago. He tilted his head. Is he coming over? No, sweetheart, she said, reaching out to brush his hair back. Not yet. Later that night, when the boys were asleep and the house had gone quiet, she found herself sitting on the couch with a mug of cold chamomile tea in her hands, untouched. The invitation would arrive in a few days. Cream cardstock, gold leaf, a beautiful, hollow gesture. She had a choice now. She could stay silent, continue raising her boys in the safety of the world she'd built for them, or she could bring them into Harrison's orbit and risk everything she'd spent 6 years protecting. But what kind of mother would she be if she denied them the truth? She thought of Mateo's constant questions. Why don't we have a dad like the other kids? Of Diego pretending to talk to Dad on his toy walkie-talkie. Of Carlos quietly asking if he did something wrong to make his dad stay away. She couldn't lie anymore, not to them. The tie around Harrison's neck was too tight. Or maybe it was just his collar. He tugged at it half-heartedly as he stared at himself in the mirror. Custom-tailored suit, crisp white shirt, every hair in place. He looked like the kind of man people expected him to be. Polished, powerful, unbothered. But his jaw was tense, and there was a dull throb in the back of his head that hadn't eased up since yesterday. He reached for his phone, tapping open the guest list again. Line after line of names blurred past his eyes until he stopped on one. Gemma Ford. And just below it, +3, seating requested, front row. That's what had started the whole damn thing. The request came through his assistant last week, and at first, he hadn't thought much of it. She was probably bringing her mother, maybe a couple of friends for support. It was strange, sure, but he figured she didn't want to walk into his wedding alone, and hell, he couldn't blame her for that. But then Athena had raised an eyebrow. 3? She asked, peering over the tablet with that usual mix of calculation and concern. Any idea who she's bringing? He'd shrugged. I didn't ask. Athena didn't say anything for a moment. Then she tapped the screen twice and murmured, Odd, most people don't ask for front row seating unless it's family. Her tone had been light, almost offhand, but it landed like a stone in his gut. He shook the thought off then, busying himself with confirming caterers and photographers and the ridiculous floral installation Naomi had insisted on. But the next day, when Athena handed him a revised layout for the seating plan and Gemma's name glared at him again from that front row placement, something itched at the edge of his thoughts. She wouldn't. Would she? The Harrison of 5 years ago might have laughed it off. But the man in the mirror now? He wasn't laughing. The boardroom at H. Ford Enterprises was wall-to-wall glass and concrete, a testament to everything sleek and modern. Harrison sat at the head of the table, half listening as his marketing director pitched the final rollout for the new AI assistant software. But his mind wasn't in it. Not really. Across the table, Athena was scribbling something on her notepad, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the pen in a rhythm only she seemed to understand. She looked up and met his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, always had been. After the meeting, he caught up with her just outside the elevator. You know something, he said plainly. She didn't blink. I know a lot of things. About Gemma. Athena gave him a look like he was being dramatic, which, truth be told, wasn't uncommon lately. She's coming, he said, with 3 guests, wants them in the front row. Yes, Athena replied. You mentioned. And I assume you invited her for closure, correct? He narrowed his eyes. Don't twist this. I'm not. She folded her arms, voice cool and steady. I just think you should ask yourself what you're hoping to get from this, Harrison. Because women like Gemma don't show up with a party unless there's a reason. And frankly, you're 2 weeks away from a high-profile wedding that has shareholders watching, journalists lurking, and a merger deal depending on your image staying. Let's say, pristine. The world shifted on a Tuesday. Harrison remembered because he always hated Tuesdays. Mondays got all the blame, but Tuesdays lingered like a hangover without the party. You were far from the weekend, too deep into the week to turn back. It was the kind of day that made truth hard to swallow. He was in his office when it happened. Afternoon sun leaking through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp golden slants across the concrete. His desk was cluttered with mock-ups from the design team, fabric samples for the wedding, and a forgotten cup of cold coffee. Somewhere beneath that pile sat a truth waiting to detonate. He found it by accident. He'd been searching for a press release, some local award Naomi was nominated for, but a different headline caught his eye, tucked in a sidebar under People You Should Know. The title was unremarkable, something like Local Pediatrician Balances Research and Motherhood. The kind of feel-good filler piece you scroll past, but the photo stopped him cold. There she was, Gemma, standing in front of St. Anne's Pediatric Clinic, her white coat open, hair windblown, smiling without showing teeth. And beside her, 3 little boys, triplets. 5 years old, maybe, dark-haired, one with glasses, one with a mischievous grin, one hiding shyly behind her lab coat. They looked like someone had taken his face and shrunk it into smaller versions, copied, pasted, multiplied. The screen swam in front of him. He clicked. The article spoke of her commitment to pediatric care, her groundbreaking work in early development. It mentioned how she balanced single motherhood with long hours and research grants. It praised her resilience, her humility. It mentioned the boys by name, Mateo, Diego, and Carlos Ford. Ford. She hadn't changed her last name, and she'd given it to them. The words blurred as he read them again, and again. Triplets, single mother, 5 years old. Harrison sat very still. Then he reached for the drawer. Athena's drawer. She kept everything there, file folders she didn't trust the cloud with, old-school things, as she called them. Backups, just in case. She never liked surprises. He flipped through contracts, marketing plans, archived notes from board meetings, and then he saw it. An unlabeled manila envelope, thin, dog-eared at the edges, the flap worn soft from opening and closing. He didn't hesitate. He opened it. Letters. 3 of them. Written in the soft, steady curve of Gemma's handwriting. Dear Harrison, I know you may not want to hear from me, but this is important. He didn't breathe as he read. The first letter was gentle, hopeful, dated 2 months after she left. She told him about the pregnancy, that it hadn't been planned, but it wasn't a mistake. She wanted him to know, not to ask for anything, but because he had a right. The second letter came later, a little sharper, more tired. She mentioned the complications. The hospital stays. How she understood he was busy, maybe confused, but she just wanted him to know she wasn't alone in this. The third was heartbreak in ink. It said nothing about money, nothing about blame, just that she tried, that she was done trying. He found sonogram photos tucked between the pages. 3 little shadows in black and white, barely formed but already whole. His sons. A sound escaped him, something between a breath and a groan. He sank back in his chair, the letters clutched in both hands, shaking like they weighed 1,000 pounds. How had he not known? Because someone had made sure he didn't. Athena wasn't at her desk when he stormed out of his office. He didn't wait. He found her in the small conference room, laptop open, preparing for a Zoom with shareholders. She looked up. Something wrong? He tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed with a thud that startled even her. She stared down at it, then back up at him. So you found it? His voice was quiet. You kept this from me. I protected you. You lied. Athena stood, calm as ever. Her blouse was pale blue, her lipstick subtle, always composed, always in control. You were unraveling back then. I did what I had to do. No, he said, stepping closer. You did what you wanted to do. You decided I wasn't ready. You took it out of my hands. I made a judgment call. They're my sons. His voice cracked. You had no right. She held his gaze, but her breath hitched, just a little. You were building something. You were on the edge of becoming the man you are now. And what the hell am I now? He shot back. Some CEO with no clue his kids were growing up without him, a man who invited the mother of his children to his wedding like it was some twisted game. Athena didn't speak. Silence stretched between them like a gulf. Then she said, she didn't want anything from you. Not money, not recognition. I read the letters. She just wanted to be heard. Harrison closed his eyes. He saw them, those three little faces, peering out from behind their mother, tucked into her arms, their smiles untouched by his absence. His whole life had been about control, building, winning, proving, and somehow the most important thing had happened without him, without his knowledge, without his presence. He opened his eyes. You're fired. Athena stiffened. Harrison, I can't look at you, he said. I trusted you. She nodded slowly, picked up her laptop, walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. Hours passed. He sat alone in the conference room. Gemma's letters spread out like a map he was too late to read. The sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the city he once thought he owned. Every light in that room, every framed award on the wall, every inch of that success suddenly felt hollow. This wasn't closure. This was a reckoning. He had sons, 3 of them, and they'd spent 5 birthdays without a father. Harrison ran a hand over his face. His chest hurt, a kind of ache that couldn't be soothed with bourbon or time or another merger deal. What had he done? He thought of the wedding, the vows, the dress Naomi had flown to Italy to pick out, the photographer, the champagne tower, the guest list with dignitaries and magazine editors and tech royalty. None of it mattered, because he had built his castle on the wrong foundation. And the woman who should have been his bride once, who had held their sons through colic and coughs and questions, she was coming. Not for revenge, not for a scene, but maybe for truth. And now he owed her one. The ocean was calm that evening, the kind of calm that crept into your bones and made you forget the noise of regular life. Waves lapped gently at the shore, and seagulls glided overhead in lazy arcs, calling out now and then like they were talking to the sea itself. Gemma stood at the edge of the water, her sandals in one hand, feet buried in warm sand, jeans rolled just high enough to let the tide brush her ankles. The boys were building castles farther down the beach, 3 of them, each with their own fortress, too stubborn to share one like she'd suggested earlier. Carlos was gathering seashells, Mateo was digging with laser focus, and Diego was trying to flood his castle with a bucket of seawater just to watch it collapse. That was Diego. Chaotic joy with a crooked grin. She was smiling softly, halfway between laughter and longing, when her phone buzzed in the pocket of her light sweater. No one called her at this hour. Not when she was on break. Not when she was here. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen on her phone in over 6 years. Harrison. The smile disappeared. For a second, she just stared at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly. The sound of the ocean faded under the roaring in her ears. Her thumb hovered above the decline button, then the accept, back and forth, her heart thudding like a drum. She answered on the 4th ring. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Not the kind that meant bad signal, but the kind that meant someone didn't know where to begin. Then, softly, a breath. And his voice, low and uneven. I saw them, Gemma. Her knees almost gave out. She took a shaky breath and sat down right there in the sand. I saw the picture, he said. In that article. Didn't know. God, I didn't know anything. She didn't respond at first, just listened. The boys' laughter carried down the wind, faint and beautiful, like music from another life. "I tried," she finally said. Her voice cracked. "I tried to tell you. I wrote. I called. Athena, she shut me down." "I know." His voice wavered. "I found the letters, the sonograms. She kept them from me." Gemma wiped her cheek, surprised to find it wet. 6 years, Harrison. "I know. They ask about you," she said. "Not every day, but they do. They want to know why their daddy never came." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I didn't even know I was a father, Gemma. I missed everything. First steps, first words, every damn thing." His voice was tight now, hoarse, like he was swallowing glass. "I thought you didn't want to be found," she said gently. "That you just left. I didn't." A pause. "I swear to you I didn't." There was so much weight in those words it made her ache all over again. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the ocean gold. The wind picked up just enough to make her tuck her hair behind her ear. The boys had started yelling about Diego's moat breaking through to Mateo's tower, and Gemma smiled despite the ache in her chest. "Gemma," he said, and it came out barely a whisper. "Can I see them?" She closed her eyes. 1,000 emotions swirled in her chest. Grief, fear, anger, maybe even the ghost of something tender. "I'm not ready for them to meet you," she said honestly. "Not yet." "I understand," he said, and she could hear the regret in every syllable. "But maybe you and I could meet first. Talk. I just need to understand what I missed, and how to be a part of this, of them." She looked down the beach. Mateo was now mediating between his brothers like a tiny diplomat, arms crossed and brows furrowed. "All right," she said softly. "Tomorrow. Just us. There's a place in town. Quiet. Near the marina." He exhaled hard, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Thank you. I'm not promising anything," she added. "This doesn't erase what happened." "I don't want to erase it," he said. "I just want to begin. Somewhere." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Then she ended the call before she could change her mind. That night, Gemma sat on the small balcony of their rented beach cottage, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the sound of the ocean soothing but distant now. Her mother had just put the boys to bed, and inside she could hear the faint hum of the dishwasher and the sleepy creaks of an old house settling into night. She held her phone loosely, rereading the call log as if seeing his name again would help her believe it had happened. So much had changed in one day. So much had stayed the same. Across town, Harrison sat in the dark of his penthouse, elbows on his knees, the soft light of the city spilling in through the windows. He'd canceled dinner with Naomi, told her something about a work delay, a press interview, anything he could think of. The wedding no longer lived in the front of his mind. Now, it was 3 boys on a beach, and the woman who carried the weight of their world when he hadn't even known they existed. The sun hadn't fully risen when Harrison picked up the phone and dialed Naomi. He didn't rehearse what he'd say. Whatever this was, this thing lodged in his chest, pushing breath from his lungs, wasn't something he could package into neat sentences. And she, of all people, would hear it. Not just the words, but the space between them. She answered after 2 rings. "Morning," she said, still sleepy. "Thought you had that PR thing in Midtown." He leaned against the cold window pane, phone pressed to his ear. The city below stirred awake, unaware that the version of his life he'd crafted so carefully was about to collapse. "I need to talk to you," he said. Silence. Then the sheets rustling as she sat up. "Okay, what's going on?" He swallowed. "I can't marry you." Another pause, then quieter. "Why?" His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Because I've been lying. To you, to myself, and it's not fair to either of us." "Harrison, what the hell are you talking about?" "I invited someone to the wedding," he said. "Gemma." "I know who she is," Naomi snapped, voice hardening. You told me it was for closure, PR cleanup. The whole let's show we're on good terms nonsense. She's the mother of my kids. Everything went quiet on the other end of the line. My kids, he repeated. 3 boys. I didn't know. Athena kept it from me. I found out a few days ago. Naomi didn't respond. I can't pretend, he went on. I can't stand at that altar, wear the tux, say those words, when all I can think about is them. I need to be a father now, Naomi. For real. Not some press-ready role model in a magazine spread. I need to be there for them. And Gemma. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was steady but cold. You didn't just use me for the wedding, Harrison. You used me for the illusion of a life you don't even want. He couldn't argue. You're not heartbroken, she added. You're relieved. He let that settle. She was right. I'm sorry, he said. She exhaled, slow and tight. I should have known. You always looked good beside me, but you never really looked at me. Then she hung up. No shouting, no begging, no drawn-out scene. Just goodbye. 2 days later, he sat across from Gemma in a small, worn booth tucked into the corner of Marlowe's cafe, a place they used to meet during their early days, when life was simpler and coffee was their only indulgence. The place hadn't changed. Still smelled like cinnamon rolls and old books. Same cracked vinyl on the seats. Same sweet-faced waitress with a memory like a vault. Gemma stirred her tea absently, eyes down. Harrison slid a manila folder across the table. What's this? She asked. Accounts, he said. For the boys, one for each of them. College, medical, long-term savings. All under your name until we figure out what's next. She stared at the folder but didn't touch it. I'm not here to buy my way back, he added quickly. It's not hush money, it's not guilt. It's just what I should have done 5 years ago. She nodded slowly. That's a start, but it doesn't fix anything. I know. Gemma leaned back, letting out a breath. You missed everything, Harrison. All of it. I carried them alone, gave birth alone, held them when they had fevers and night terrors. I worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. I couldn't even afford diapers some months. His throat tightened. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Not really. Not back then. You were chasing the next big thing, and I was collateral. That's not fair, he said. It's not supposed to be, she snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry. I don't even know how to talk to you anymore without breaking something inside me. The waitress came by, dropped off their orders, black coffee for him, oatmeal and fruit for her, then slipped away without a word. Gemma picked at the strawberries on her plate, voice quieter now. Carlos was born early. He was the smallest, 2 pounds, 10 ounces. Lived in the NICU for 3 weeks. I didn't know if he'd make it. Harrison closed his eyes. The image of a tiny child struggling to breathe in a plastic incubator was more than he could take. Diego broke his arm climbing the monkey bars last year. Thought he could fly. I sat in that ER holding his little hand while he cried so hard he fell asleep. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came. And Mateo, she continued, he's so much like you, it scares me. He asks 100 questions a day, overthinks everything, needs logic for every emotion. She finally looked up at him. They are amazing, but they've also been hurting. There's a space in them where a father should have been. He nodded. Let me be part of their lives now. However you'll let me. I want to earn it. Her eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. Meeting you again has stirred up a lot, she said. Some of it good, most of it hard. I'm not asking for you to forgive everything, he replied, but I am asking for a beginning. She studied him. Outside the window, the wind picked up, and a paper sign fluttered on the door. Help wanted. I'm not the same woman you left, she said. And I'm not the same man who left you. Gemma reached out, her fingers brushing the folder. She slid it toward her, not as an acceptance, but maybe as a test. "We'll talk again," she said. "Soon." The morning air had a softness to it. Late spring in Tennessee always came with that gentle hush. Dew on the grass, light breezes that carried the smell of pine and something sweet blooming nearby. The park wasn't crowded yet. Just a few early joggers and an old couple walking their beagle along the lakeside path. Harrison had arrived 15 minutes early. He'd worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and the only pair of sneakers he owned that didn't scream, "Tech CEO." He didn't want to look like a man who showed up in polished leather and million-dollar gilt. He just wanted to look like a man trying his best. He paced a little, hands in pockets, watching ducks skim across the lake water, his eyes flicking every few seconds to the parking lot. His chest ached, not the sharp, panicked kind, but the kind that came with waiting for something you'd long given up on, and now suddenly had a chance at. Then he saw them. Gemma stepped out of her SUV with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a baseball cap tugged low on her head. She was casual but composed, every inch the strong, put-together woman he remembered. Only now, there was a different kind of power in her stride, the kind born from years of carrying the world alone. And beside her, 3 boys, 3 little carbon copies of him, tumbling out of the back seat like excited puppies. Harrison's breath caught in his throat. Mateo, tallest of the 3, his brow furrowed like he was already analyzing the playground layout. Diego, bouncing on the balls of his feet, already pulling a toy robot from his backpack. Carlos, smallest, trailing just behind his brothers, clutching a stuffed dinosaur tight in one hand, eyes darting to the unfamiliar man by the tree. Harrison didn't move. Couldn't really. His legs felt like stone. Gemma caught his eye and gave a small nod. She wasn't smiling, not quite, but there was something in her face, an openness, a permission, that told him it was okay to take the first step. So he did. He knelt down, slowly, meeting the boys at their eye level. "Hi," he said, voice shaking like loose gravel. "I'm Harrison." Mateo studied him, eyes sharp. "You're the guy from Mom's phone." Diego pointed. "You're the one who made Mom cry last night." Gemma's head whipped around. "Diego," she said gently, warning in her voice. Harrison blinked, surprised, but not offended. "I probably did," he said softly, "and I'm sorry for that." Carlos said nothing. He stepped closer to Gemma, burying half his face against her leg, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. Mateo extended a hand, serious, formal. Harrison reached out and shook it like it was the most important handshake of his life. Diego launched forward without warning and gave Harrison a full-bodied hug around the neck. "You look like us," he declared. "Even your hair's messy like mine." Harrison laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. "Yeah," he said, voice cracking. "I guess it is." And then Carlos took a step. Tiny, tentative. He looked up at Harrison, quiet as a whisper, and said, "Are you our dad?" Harrison looked at Gemma, then back to Carlos. The little boy's eyes were wet, like he wasn't sure if he was asking something too big. "I am," Harrison whispered, "if you'll let me be." Carlos reached out and took his hand. Harrison nearly lost it. They walked. Not fast, not with a purpose, just around the lake path that looped through the park, past the playground, the dogwoods, and the little wooden bridge that crossed over a babbling creek. The boys talked over each other, telling stories about school, about who could burp the loudest, about the worm Diego tried to sneak into his lunchbox last week. Gemma walked beside them, a quiet presence. She didn't interrupt, didn't steer the conversation, just let it unfold. Harrison listened like it was gospel. Mateo asked him about robots. Not toy ones, real ones. Can they learn to think like people? Some try, Harrison said, smiling. But it's not the same. People are messy. Real thinking takes a messy kind of heart. Mateo nodded thoughtfully, as if filing the answer away for later use. Diego asked if Harrison had ever punched anyone. Like in a fight. Harrison blinked. Not really. That's okay, Diego said. Mom says using your words is cooler anyway. But I punched Tommy once because he called Carlos a baby. Carlos, walking quietly on Harrison's left, turned and smiled. He cried when Diego hit him. I bet he did, Harrison murmured, squeezing Carlos's small hand. They reached the playground, and the boys took off like cannonballs. Harrison stood beside Gemma, watching them climb, jump, shout, and laugh. They're beautiful, he said. They're exhausting, she replied. But there was pride in her voice. So much pride it nearly broke him. He looked over at her, voice low. Thank you for today. By the end of the first week, Harrison had mud on his jeans, marker on the cuffs of his shirts, and a new soreness in his lower back that hadn't been there before. He didn't complain. Not once. Not when Diego tripped and bled all over his khakis, or when Carlos asked to ride on his shoulders for the 10th time in one afternoon. It had only been a few days, but something in him had shifted. He wasn't Harrison Ford, the CEO in the park anymore. He was Daddy, at least in small, unspoken ways. And it was the first time in years he felt like someone real. They came to the park almost every evening after school. Mateo carried a book or notebook, always scribbling something, sometimes stopping mid-walk to ask questions about how clouds worked or why ants never bumped into each other. Diego brought a different toy every day, usually with some wild plan that involved climbing things he shouldn't. Carlos, quieter, stuck close to Harrison's side, like he was still figuring him out. And Harrison? He became the guy who tied shoes, handed out snacks, explained why the sky changed colors, and clapped the loudest when Carlos made it across the monkey bars. Every single why question they threw at him, he answered. Not always perfectly, but with all the heart he had. Gemma didn't always come near. Sometimes she stayed at the bench, pretending to read, one eye on the pages and the other on the four of them. It wasn't that she didn't trust Harrison. She just wasn't ready to let go of the fear. Because men left. They promised, then they disappeared. And kids didn't recover from broken promises the way adults did. They held on to the cracks, even when they couldn't name them. Still, the more she watched him, knees in the dirt, shirt wrinkled, arms open wide for hugs or to catch a runaway Diego, something in her started to quiet. He was trying. Not in grand gestures, not with big words or expensive gifts, just steady, daily effort. The kind that mattered. That Sunday when the boys asked if Harrison could come over for dinner, Gemma hesitated. Please, Mateo had said. He could try the spaghetti. He likes garlic bread, Diego added. Carlos, shy as ever, only nodded and hugged her leg. She looked at their hopeful faces, then at the man who stood waiting a few feet away, his hands buried in his pockets like a boy at a school dance. She nodded. Just once. He showed up that evening in a worn blue sweater, jeans that didn't match, and sneakers that had definitely seen better days. He held a foil-wrapped loaf of garlic bread in one hand and 3 little brown paper bags in the other. Just a little something, he said at the door. Nothing fancy. The boys pulled him inside before she could respond, each grabbing a wrist, dragging him straight into the kitchen like they were unveiling a surprise. Harrison grinned, letting them lead. Okay, I'm moving. Gemma closed the door behind him, heart caught somewhere between caution and warmth. Dinner smelled like basil and butter. The kitchen buzzed with clinks and laughs. The boys insisted Harrison sit between Diego and Carlos, who competed for his attention like puppies. This is my seat, Diego said. No, it's mine, Carlos protested. Mateo rolled his eyes. Guys, it doesn't matter. He can sit there tomorrow, too. Gemma looked up sharply. Tomorrow? She didn't say anything, just served the pasta and sat across the table, watching. The meal was messy. There was sauce on shirts, noodles on the floor, and a Parmesan cheese shaker that Diego decided should snow onto everything. Harrison didn't flinch. He laughed. He reached over and wiped Carlos's chin. He listened as Mateo explained the difference between two rocket designs. He offered Diego half his garlic bread when the boy dropped his. Gemma hadn't seen this version of him before. Not back then, not even when they were in love. This was someone new. Or maybe someone old. Just waiting to come forward. After dinner, the boys gave him the full house tour. Mateo's room had posters of planets and a growing collection of books with bent spines. Diego's was chaos, Lego towers, action figures mid-battle, a blanket fort that he insisted was off-limits to adults. Carlos's room was neat and small, his dinosaur collection lined up along the windowsill. There was a tiny keyboard in the corner. "You play?" Harrison asked. Carlos nodded. "A little." Harrison crouched beside him. "Will you show me?" Carlos sat, pressed a few keys, then, softly, started playing Estrellita. The same lullaby Gemma used to hum when they lay on their old couch, back when dreams were cheap and hope was free. Harrison reached over, tapped along, just 2 fingers finding their way like memory. Carlos glanced up at him. No words, just a spark. Gemma stood in the doorway, her hand over her chest. The sound filled the small room like a heartbeat. For a moment, the past didn't matter. Later, after the kids had gone to bed and the dishes were done, they stood in the front hall. Gemma leaned against the wall, arms crossed, barefoot on the wood floor. She looked tired, but not in a way that begged for escape, more like someone who had given all she had for the day and still had a little grace left in reserve. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner?" he asked. "For not disappearing." He nodded, his gaze steady and soft. "I'm not going anywhere." "I want to believe that." "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Not yet. Just let me prove it." She looked down, then met his eyes again. "They love you already. They don't really know me. They don't need to. Not yet. What they need is for you to show up, again and again, until showing up becomes who you are." "I will," he promised. "I swear." Gemma reached for the doorknob, then paused for a moment. "You were a good dad tonight," she said. "You didn't have to be perfect. You were just here." Then she opened the door, and he stepped out into the cool night air with a chest somehow heavier and lighter at the same time, full of things he didn't yet know how to name. Back at his apartment, Harrison kicked off his shoes and dropped into the worn corner of his couch, a quiet smile tugging at the edge of his mouth as he peeled a tiny dinosaur sticker from the bottom of his sock. Diego's doing, no doubt. He picked up his phone and opened the calendar app, creating a new event. Sunday dinner, Gemma's, 6 p.m. Bring garlic bread. He set it to repeat weekly, tapped save, and sat back into the silence of his home. But tonight, it didn't feel like silence. It felt like peace, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He felt full. Sunday came again, the third one since Harrison first stepped into that cozy little house on Maple Drive. By now, the garlic bread was a running joke. Carlos had asked if he'd ever make it from scratch. Harrison promised he'd try, though he wasn't sure how flour turned into anything but a mess. It was early morning, still quiet, the kind of quiet that felt rare in a life that used to move from meeting to meeting, coast to coast. Harrison sat at the small writing desk tucked in the corner of his apartment, one he hadn't used in years. A legal pad lay in front of him. No laptop, no cloud, just pen and paper. Something real. He didn't plan to write anything profound. This wasn't a speech or a quarterly report. This was just for him. April 14th. Today, Carlos asked me why some birds fly in a V. I told him it's so they can take turns leading, so no one bird gets too tired. He thought about it, nodded, then said, "That's like you and Mommy." I didn't know what to say to that, but maybe he's right. Maybe that's all we're doing now, taking turns, learning how to lead when it's our time, resting when we need to, just trying to get these kids home. He paused, looking down at the simple lines, then added, "This isn't about catching up anymore. It's about being here now." Later that afternoon, Gemma stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing off fresh strawberries while the boys argued over who got the blue plate. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection on the microwave, hair pulled back, no makeup, sleeves pushed to her elbows. This was who she was now. No more performances. Just the woman who had raised 3 boys on laughter, sacrifice, and hope. When the doorbell rang, she didn't flinch. Carlos beat her to the door. "Harrison's here!" he called, swinging it open without waiting. Harrison stood there, holding a small paper bag, wearing a half apron and a sheepish grin. "I brought homemade garlic bread," he said. "Well, half of one. I dropped the other half." Diego burst out laughing. "You cooked? By yourself?" "I tried," Harrison replied, stepping inside. "It's a work in progress." Gemma raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms as she walked into the room. "That's either brave or foolish. Little of both." They smiled, nothing too big, nothing rushed. Dinner was the same messy miracle it always was. Kids talking over one another, Mateo trying to correct Diego's math, Carlos humming softly between bites. The food was warm, and so was the space. Later, after dessert, Harrison helped clear the plates. He didn't ask. He just did it. Gemma noticed. Not just the plates, but the rhythm he was falling into. Like he'd always belonged at this table, in this kitchen, in the background hum of their everyday lives. She stood with him at the sink, drying the last dish while the boys played in the living room. "They're starting to expect you," she said, not looking at him. "I know," he replied. "So am I." She nodded. Whatever this is, it has to grow slow. I'm okay with slow. They've been broken before. So have I. She met his eyes then, really looked. And something in her softened, not like falling, but like unfolding. Elsewhere in the city, in a sleek apartment that had once echoed with purpose, Athena sat alone with a glass of wine and her tablet glowing in her lap. Her name hadn't been in the news for a while. Not since the quiet resignation, the shift in the company board, the subtle fade from the life she'd orchestrated. She scrolled through an article from a local lifestyle blog. Ford tech founder seen enjoying weekend with his children. There was a grainy photo, Harrison on a bench by the lake, 2 of the boys climbing all over him, one asleep against his chest. The caption said, "New beginnings." Athena stared at the image, then set the tablet down. She poured another glass of wine, this time slower. She'd controlled everything for years, until the one thing that mattered slipped through her fingers. Weeks passed like that, quietly, meaningfully. Harrison became part of the background, like the porch light or the mail slot, not flashy, just consistent. He walked the boys to school when he could, showed up to Carlos's first music class, let Mateo explain the solar system twice, held Diego's hand through a stomach bug. He wasn't a guest anymore. One Sunday, they didn't ask if he was coming, they just waited for the doorbell. Then came the beach. It had been Carlos's idea, actually. "We should go to the beach," he said one evening, mouth full of cereal. "Yeah," Diego shouted. "Like a real trip, with towels and sandwiches and sunscreen that stinks." Mateo adjusted his glasses. "We could build a working dam out of sand." Gemma had looked over at Harrison, who only smiled and said, "Sounds like a plan." They drove out early on a Saturday, packed into Gemma's SUV with too many snacks and not enough sunscreen. By the time they reached the coastline, the boys had already fallen asleep once, woken up, and started arguing over whose turn it was to pick the music. They found a quiet stretch of beach not far from a sleepy marina. No tourist traps, just wind and sea and sky. The boys exploded onto the sand like wild things. Gemma laid out the blanket, Harrison set up the umbrella, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing to do but be. They built castles, chased seagulls, shared sandwiches with too much mustard, and when the sun began to slip behind the waves, They sat in a line, Gemma, Harrison, and 3 sun-kissed boys between them. No noise, no weight, just family. Imperfect, unpolished, but whole. Carlos leaned against Harrison's side, his hand slipping into his without a word. Mateo rested his head on Gemma's shoulder. Diego was half asleep, his head on a beach towel, his hand still clutching a plastic shovel. "I don't think it's about fixing things anymore," Gemma said, her voice barely above the waves. "No," Harrison agreed. "It's about what we build from here." She looked at him, then back at the horizon. "It's not the life we planned." "No," he said, "but it might be the one that matters." 10 years later, it was late July, the kind of southern summer day that felt like the sun had decided to settle in and stay a while. The heat rolled in waves off the porch rails, the air thick with the smell of cut grass, honeysuckle, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. A warm breeze rustled the wind chimes, making the porch swing creak gently beneath Gemma's bare feet. The Ford house looked different now, expanded, repainted, settled, but it still had the same blue shutters, the same wild hydrangeas blooming along the fence line, and the same wraparound porch where 1,000 small moments had unfolded over the years. Inside, laughter echoed from the kitchen. Harrison's voice mixed with the clatter of pans and a few shouted warnings about someone using too much vanilla. Gemma smiled. They'd been married 8 years now. Quiet ceremony, simple rings, just the 5 of them on a windswept cliff in Maine with the ocean as their witness. The door creaked open behind her. Carlos stepped outside, now 17, taller than both his parents, his hair dark and tousled. He wore a t-shirt from his music scholarship program and carried a small notebook in his hand. "Mom," he said, "Dad says if I keep putting chocolate chips in the cornbread, he's gonna disown me." She laughed. "He says that every year." Carlos plopped down beside her on the swing. "Yeah, but this time I used extra." He leaned his head on her shoulder, just like he used to do when he was 5. He was still quiet, still gentle. But now he played 4 instruments, composed his own music, and had already been accepted early into Juilliard. "You nervous about leaving?" she asked. "A little," he said, "but also ready." She nodded, brushing his bangs back like she had 100 times before. "That's how you know it's time." Inside the house, Diego's voice rang out next. "Mateo, stop reorganizing the spice rack and come help me with the cake." Diego, still wild, still brilliant in unpredictable ways, was planning to study aerospace engineering in California. He'd spent the last 3 summers in a NASA youth program, and he still hadn't outgrown his obsession with flying. And Mateo, ever the logical one, was prepping for med school, just like his mother. He was methodical, thoughtful, a quiet leader who often held the household together when chaos threatened to take over. 10 years. 10 full years of scraped knees, math tests, family movie nights, arguments over curfews and birthday cakes half-burned but made with love. 10 years of slow-building trust, steady presence, and shared milestones. Harrison had never once missed a school play. He'd learned how to braid hair for Carlos's cello recitals. He built science fair volcanoes at midnight and cried harder than anyone when Mateo gave the valedictorian speech last spring. He hadn't just shown up. He'd stayed. And Gemma, once guarded and careful, had opened more every year. There were still moments. Old ghosts didn't vanish overnight, but they'd found a rhythm. 2 people, 2 histories, 1 life built on shared love and forgiveness. The screen door banged open. Harrison stepped onto the porch with flour on his cheek and a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. He looked older, but in the best way, wiser, calmer, laugh lines carved deep around his eyes. "Carlos," he said, "you're lucky I like you. That cornbread is outrageous." Carlos smirked. "It's called innovation, Dad." Harrison reached for Gemma's hand, squeezing gently. "Dinner's almost ready. We just have to convince Diego not to light the cake on fire for dramatic effect." They stood, walking inside as a family, the porch swing swaying gently behind them. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with energy, boys teasing one another, music playing low from the speakers, the scent of rosemary and butter filling the air. This was what 10 years could look like. Not perfect, but deeply, wonderfully real. And it was enough. This story is a deeply moving exploration of second chances, quiet redemption, and the unshakable bonds of family. Through the lens of Harrison and Gemma's emotionally layered journey, we witness how time, regret, and resilience shape not only individuals, but the lives they choose to rebuild. What makes the characters unforgettable is how real they feel. Harrison, once driven by pride and ego, transforms into a man capable of humility, tenderness, and fatherhood. Not by grand gestures, but by showing up again and again. His evolution isn't quick or dramatic. It's slow, honest, and beautifully flawed. That makes it all the more powerful. Gemma, on the other hand, embodies the quiet strength of a mother who carried the weight of heartbreak and responsibility without bitterness. Her guarded forgiveness is a testament to emotional maturity, and her decision to let love back into her life, on her terms, is both brave and inspiring. The story doesn't rely on perfect endings or sweeping romance. Instead, it finds its strength in the ordinary. Sunday dinners, scraped knees, piano songs, shared silence on the porch. These are the moments that rebuild a life. The most profound message from this journey is this: it's never too late to choose love, but love must be earned. Not demanded, not assumed, but proven through presence and patience. The story reminds us that redemption doesn't mean erasing the past. It means owning it and growing beyond it. In a world where people often chase perfection, this story gently teaches us that real family isn't about appearances. It's about showing up, again and again, even after the damage is done. It's about choosing to love when it's hardest, and staying when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.